Again, welcome everyone. My name is Jennifer, and I am the Executive Director of NASW New Jersey. And we're going to hang tight for just a second before we jump into today's presentation. It's right at 12 o'clock, and we want to give our colleagues just a moment to log on in case they were having some Zoom traffic flow issues or wrapping up other meetings. For some of you, you might even be back in the office these days. So we're going to hang tight for just a second. For those of you who are joining, if you don't mind keeping yourselves on mute, that would be fantastic. Lots of people, over 200 registered for today's conversation. We want to make sure that we don't have too much background noise. We're going to wait just one more minute here. I see a couple of people still lingering in our Zoom room, trying to get connected, and then we'll kick off today's conversation. For those who are watching on Facebook Live, beauty of technology is that you get to watch and participate with us today. We will be monitoring our Facebook live stream. So if you have any questions, we invite you to drop them in the video comments below, and we will try to answer them at different points in today's conversation and get some answers from our thought leadership on today's call. With that, I think we're going to go ahead and jump into today's conversation. We are excited to be joining our friends here today. And of course, that's the moment when my cell phone decides to ring, so I apologize for that. Again, my name is Jennifer Thompson, and I'm the Executive Director of NASW New Jersey. And I am so excited to be here today for today's community conversation with one of our newest partners and friends of social workers, Best Practices. We are going to be having a conversation today about insurance companies, billing, all of your questions, and really making sure that you're getting what you're owed. David and his team are going to be answering so many of the questions that we frequently hear about and talking to a little bit about the work that they do. Before we jump into that, I'd love the team at Best Practices, if you could just unmute yourselves. We'd love to introduce you. If you could tell us who you are, your title, just so our participants here today know who's going to be speaking to us amongst all of the Zoom tiles. Welcome.
Welcome. Good morning. My name is Roberta Gold. I'm a licensed clinical social worker practicing here in New Jersey.
And my name is Dave Gold, and I'm a co-founder of Best Practices. And also we work out of New Jersey.
My name is Danielle, and I am the Chief Operations Officer. I'm not in New Jersey.
And my name's Lisa Oker, and I am the Provider Onboarding Manager, and I am not in New Jersey either.
Well, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us again today. I know you have a wealth of experience and lots of information to share with our community, and this is certainly one of the topics we hear so many questions about on a daily basis, and we're just thrilled to be able to have this conversation with you. You know, one of the interesting things about Best Practices as a company is the story and why you are invested in the work that we do here as a chapter, but also the work of social workers and billing. And I wonder if perhaps you could start us off today by just telling us a little bit about the story of how Best Practices came to be. It is an interesting journey and story, and I'd love to hear a little bit more about it to frame today's conversation. I wonder, Roberta, would you be willing to start us out? Tell us a little about your journey as a social worker, and then we'll move to David.
I would love to. I'm very pleased to be joining you all here this morning. It's very exciting. Always nice to meet with members of my social work community. I got into social work later in life. It was a mid-age career change for me. I had some work experience in various companies. I had also worked with my husband in a technology company. and came to a crossroads in my career where, in fact, when I first attended college, I studied psychology, so I've always had an interest in it, but delayed jumping in. And at this point in my life, I decided I was going to go for what felt right for me. And what felt right for me was to study social work. And I pursued my degree, graduated, and obtained my first job, which was an agency working out of Trenton with young children. And I did my agency work, and I got my hours done, and I passed my test. And then at some point, back in 2012, I decided I wanted to dip a toe into private practice as well. I had a friend and colleague who was sort of leading the way. So I kind of followed in her footsteps. And while I was still working at an agency, which is a very common, career path, I decided to in a very small way, start to do private practice work. And I thought that I had enough business experience to guide me. Little did I know what to expect when I was linking up with insurance companies to be sure that I could get paid for the work that I did. I learned how to get myself impaneled. I learned how to barely fill out a HCFA form, where to send it so my claims would get paid, and began juggling working for an agency, taking incoming phone calls, doing verifications on insurance, meeting with clients, following up to make sure I got paid. And in the interim, again, following in the colleague's footsteps, she obtained a biller. And when I felt like I was in over my head, I went along with her biller as well. And that was going fairly smoothly for a while until I came across some accounting work that I had to do on my own to make sure that I was getting paid for my sessions, when I discovered a strange incident as I was examining the paperwork. I noticed that for the same client, in 2 different sessions, 1 week I would be paid one amount for the client, and another for the same CPT code, and the following week I would be paid a different amount. And my biller was not picking up on this. This came to my attention as I was doing my own accounting. It kind of raised some eyebrows. I couldn't quite fathom how this was happening. And then I noticed it was happening with other clients as well. And I happened to bring it to my husband's attention. He was in between businesses and sort of looking for what his next venture might be. And having worked in the technology field, he was somewhat aware of that something didn't seem quite right here in how this was set up in some database to make sure my reimbursements were correct. He started looking into it, and by happenstance, we ran across some mail that we had from Blue Cross Blue Shield, which actually had the name of a vice president on it. And he was able to reach out to that vice president, and he was able to get a meeting with them. And it turned out to be a very interesting and very fortuitous meeting, because it seems that we came upon a can of worms that they were not quite comfortable discussing and couldn't quite give us a reasonable explanation for why these things were happening. And so my husband sort of jumped in and took over from there. And I was quite happy with him doing it, because it was nice to have someone to relegate all these other responsibilities to. And then he came up with the suggestion, well, it's kind of hard for you to answer the phones and call the insurance company. And if you're busy in sessions, then you're missing obtaining clients. Those clients are going elsewhere. I said, that makes a lot of sense. And he became my receptionist. So he started out, I was the boss, it was my company. And now I had a personal receptionist who handled incoming phone calls and discussions with incoming clients who were interested in services. And he did the verifications, and he made sure the payments got made. And from there, our company sort of grew organically as I began to speak with my colleagues and discuss with them what we were discovering and the benefits of me absolutely turning over all my administrative work to someone else, so I could just focus on doing the best therapy I could, focus on being there with my patients, documenting the way I was supposed to do, and doing it in an ethical manner. And that's how best practices got its tiny little start. And since then, it's grown organically just by word of mouth. And this is our first venture into seeing, if others out there in our community might benefit from the services that we provide.
Thank you so much. What a great story. And I think one that resonates so deeply with many private practitioners, right? The constant struggle that you have with doing the billing and the paperwork and really the business of business, and also being a social worker. David, I wonder if you might want to jump in for a minute and talk a little bit about your role in bringing the company to where it is today. And you're on mute.
Thank you so much. I'll be much briefer than that. That was a social worker talking. Here's what everybody needs to know. I'm married 46 years. And when I see my wife in need or my wife upset or frustrated, my natural tendency is to get involved, see what I can do to help. That causes problems sometimes, but in this case, it worked out. Roberta had mentioned how the inconsistencies in insurance companies' response to claim submissions is something that we saw over and over. And if Roberta would get on the phone and try and straighten it out, she met the rabbit hole and she twirled on down that, never came out the other side. And if she did, it was with bad information. So we just couldn't make progress. Eventually, as Roberta pointed out, I was able to get a series of meetings with the chief of staff at Horizon Blue Cross Blue Shield, one of the Blue Cross affiliates, and their legal team, and went over line by line a series of explanation of payments and made them account for these things. And of course, they couldn't or wouldn't in a lot of cases, but the outcome of that meeting was I got assigned a dedicated resource at Horizon to help resolve these issues. And over the years, I've kept that relationship. I've been able to do that. And now we can test thousands of claims every week and get them reversed and get them paid and get past the denial situation. So the best thing I can say about how this came about is Roberta, through this, realized her dream. That's what I wanted. I wanted her to be able to be the greatest therapist that she envisioned herself as, take all of the administrative burden off of her. And my natural entrepreneurship, I guess, kicked in at some point. And I said, this has really worked out well for Roberta. She's gone from a full-time job with a part-time small practice to a full-time practice that's booming, and she's satisfied and feeling fulfilled. Let's find other people we can help this with. So that is exactly the way Roberta described it, how we came to be. I hope, Jennifer, that answers our bona fides.
It does. Thank you so much. I think it's just such a really interesting story for our community to hear, and to hear from thought leaders who have real on the ground, knowledge of what social workers are facing, particularly in their private practice, speaks a lot about, who you are as a company and your continued connection to the field. So I want to turn over to some of the meat and bones of today's conversation, because I know we have tons of questions that you're going to be able to answer. For those of you who are watching, who are in the Zoom room, just know that there is a lot of content I think we're going to cover today. We do have some takeaways that we'll email you after today's presentation. So you'll have some notes that you can take a look at. So I see a couple of you nodding heads. I know those are always helpful. And then at the end of today's conversation, there's going to be a quick jot form that you can fill out as well for additional information. So just be on the lookout for two of those things. And for those of you who are watching on Facebook Live, you can shoot us a message to our Facebook and we'll make sure you get that resource as well if you would be interested in that. So I want to talk a little bit about verification of benefits. I know that's a big question that we get in all the time, and we spend a lot of time speaking to our members about. What is it? Start there. I'm not a clinical social worker, so if you could talk to us a little bit about what are verification of benefits, why should you do it, and how do you do it? So who, what, where, when, and why, right? Who can talk to us? I see Danielle, you're nodding your head.
I will help with that. So verification of benefits is what we think is the most important step when it comes to working with insurance companies. So the verification is actually the act of contacting the insurance company and getting a patient's benefit information. We do it because it protects the provider against wrongful claim denials. It actually provides leverage when something goes wrong, you have that initial phone call that you've made that you can follow up with, and I'll get into that more later. And we perform verifications a few times. So for a new intake, we would perform a verification. So we would get a copy of their insurance card for a couple of reasons. The front of the insurance card is going to verify the ID number. So we know, sometimes when you're on the phone, you can't hear everything like you would like to. So that, and then the back of the card usually has a phone number, and the back of the card is going to give you the best phone number to contact the insurance company. It's either going to be provider services or behavioral health. And the reason that's important is because if you call the wrong phone number, you could be on hold for a very long time, and then you speak to someone and they tell you that you've called the wrong phone number, and that's super frustrating. And then you have to start all over and do it again. So we find that the card be very useful. We do a verification anytime a patient's insurance coverage changes or if they change insurance. And we also do one at the start of the plan year. So that could be in January, or some companies do it, in July. They have July to July plans, things like that. In our experience, we prefer doing phone calls for verifications. One of the most important reasons we do this is because when you make a phone call, you're able to get a reference ID number. And by law, the insurer has to give you a reference ID number. And that number is so important because it's linked to the call that you had, it's recorded. And that's the way you get to, if there is a denial, you're going to reference that caller ID and tell them, wait a minute, you told me this, but now my claim is getting denied. That's not matching what we discussed. So it really is your first line of defense. So that's why we do verifications and why we think they're so important.
Thank you so much. I know one of the questions we hear often, or even a practice that we see amongst private practitioners, and it's so hard to call and wait online and wait to speak to humans, and you get that automated voice, which is infuriating, as we all know. Why should they verify benefits? I know you touched upon it briefly via the phone, but are there any other benefits to verifying there versus using, let's say, the online portals that many companies have?
Right. So in our experience, most importantly is that caller ID. If you go to the online portal, you're not going to get a reference ID number. So the information you get there, you can't use it in the future and say, wait a minute, this information on the portal wasn't correct, because you don't have that conversation. Sometimes it's confusing to read. There's like 4 columns and they are like behavioral health and behavioral health out of office. And so just that creates confusion. They're not always up to date. If they have a deductible, it doesn't show you the deductible accumulation. So they could have met their deductible, but you wouldn't know that, or they could be halfway there to meeting it. And then this is more recent because of COVID, you don't know any telehealth benefits. So do they have them? And if they have them, is cost sharing waived? So you're missing out on a lot of pertinent information that's super important to, submitting those claims. And also we want to make sure when we are getting new patients that we're giving them the most accurate insurance information that we can, so they're prepared when they come to that first session. So that's why we don't use them.
No, that's great for people to know. I think often, our first inclination, and particularly for, clinicians who are often seeing clients during the day, and right, it might just be easier to jump online in the evening and do it versus make some of those phone calls. But I think you bring up a couple of really great missed opportunities for clarification and just making sure that you've got all your ducks in a row. So nobody doing it at 2 in the morning when you finally have time. It's important to make time during the day to make these type of phone calls.
Absolutely.
So another thing that we hear a lot about, I'm just taking a look at some of our notes. We had a ton of questions that came in. Is that about claim payment denials? I know people face this all the time. Denials are part of the game, and it sounds like really one of the impetus for you getting involved, David, and sort of hunting down why those things happen. I wonder if you could talk a little about those denials and why you should follow up on them and the nuances around following up on denials. Doing so in
Certainly,
a timely manner, et cetera.
Sure, I'm going to let Lisa. We actually have a few that we've identified we want to talk about here, and I see there are questions about them. So Lisa's going to talk about a couple. I'll talk about some, and we'll certainly take questions. Lisa, what do you have?
Yeah, sure. Again, my title is onboarding provider. I'm manager of the provider onboarding team. And one of the things that we always do is take a look at claims that have that our providers have previously submitted to look for problems and anything that might have resulted in claims not being paid or being underpaid. And we want to compare the claims with the explanations of payments, or EOPs. Of course, EOPs are what you receive as the provider. Your clients receive something called an explanation of benefits, or EOBs, which shows, what the services covered and what financial responsibility your clients may have. So, as Dave said, we want to go over a few of the very common reasons that we see on EOPs for claims being denied. First of all, there is something that Horizon Blue Cross Blue Shield uses. It's called coordination of benefits. Some of the other insurance companies have, they maybe use different vocabulary to discuss this, but what happens is, in a fairly regular fashion, your clients will receive something from their insurance company that asks them to provide information about whether or not they have any additional type of insurance. What the insurance company is looking for is if there's another type of insurance, which plan should be primary, which is secondary. But also your client may receive this and think, well, I don't have any other insurance. Why should I even respond? The reason they should respond is because your claims will be denied unless they do respond. So, so if you see something like this, a denial because of coordination of benefits being needed, you need to communicate with your client and explain that it is important to call the phone number for member services that is probably on the back of their insurance ID card, and simply say, I have other insurance in addition to Blue Cross Blue Shield, or I don't have other insurance. And then also to explain which plan should be primary and which plan should be secondary. And at that point, and one other thing I should say, I know that we're telling you over and over again the importance of these call reference numbers, but if you could ask your client to also get the name of the person they speak with, the first name and a call reference number. And that's only in case you need to follow up at some point. What should happen is that once this coordination of benefits is entered into the insurance company system, the claims that have been on hold for you during this period of time, they should start to pay. But, if you feel that it's been an inordinate amount of time before they start to pay, you might want to just follow up. And that's why that call reference number is important. So that's one area. There's another very common reason for claims being denied that we found, and it is that bear with me just a second. In addition to coordination of benefits, another reason that claims may be denied is because the language you're going to read is called policy not in effect. Now, if you've done your verification call prior to this first session, you're going to say, well, I already verified everything. The policy is in effect. Why? What's the problem? It's possible that something may have happened in the interim between the time you've made that phone call and your first date of service. For instance, it's possible that your client has missed a payment, has not paid a premium or premiums. If the premium is unpaid for at least 30 days or more, your claims will start to be denied. And so what I need to do, let me back up a second. The way that you find out why these why this problem occurs, you got to call the insurance company, and they'll be able to let you know what the problem is. They may not be able to tell you how to resolve it, but in the case of premiums not being paid, you need to have a conversation with your client and ask, do they intend to catch up with the payments? They'll need to pay whatever the balance is due. And by law, they have 90 days to do this, to catch up. Obviously, if your client has met with some financial hard times, I mean, these are conversations you're just going to have to figure out how the client is going to be able to pay for your services. Another possible reason for this problem occurring and claims being denied is if your client has lost a job and the insurance was previously provided by the employer. In this instance, most likely your client may be offered COBRA coverage, but there is a period of time in which the client has to either accept or reject the COBRA coverage. So it's a kind of a limbo period for you. Again, you're going to see that your claim's been denied, and you should have a conversation with that client and ask them what they plan to do. They may get a different insurance. They may go ahead and get a different type of insurance. They may be waiting to figure out, do they want to get the COBRA? But again, if after that period of time goes by and they decide, nah, I didn't want the COBRA, well, you've got to figure out how they're going to reimburse you for pay you for the sessions you've already had, or whether the new insurance they get may be retroactive. I don't know or think that's, but anyway, that's a conversation you've got to have with your client. So there's another reason, again, that this denial occurs, and it could be that your client has aged out of the plan. If you've got a client who is turning age 26 and has previously been on his or her parents' plan, at age 26, they're no longer eligible to be on that plan. So they may have their own insurance, but you got to find out. And the other thing is, if you've got a client who's turning age 65, that person then may be on Medicare or may have a Medicare Advantage plan. Once again, that's information you need to gather. And in all these instances, as we've already said, if the insurance, if the person's getting new insurance, you need to go through that same phone call to get the verification of benefits all over again. So those are some reasons for denial under this explanation. There's another one, and I'm going to hand you back over to Dave. There's another very common piece of language that you're going to read, and it's a little bit obscure. It's this language says policy not in effect. And there may be several reasons why that is the case. Oh, I'm sorry. I apologize. I'm a little nervous. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
The last very common reason claims may be denied is because the service is not covered. And I am gladly going to hand this back over to Dave to continue. Thanks for your attention.
Yeah, thank you. Dave, can you talk to us a little bit about the services not covered denial? What does that mean?
Certainly. Before I do that, Jennifer, I want to take just one step back, because I'm sure everybody who's watching is hearing that you constantly have to go back to the well. You constantly have to go back to the insurance, go back to your patient. This is intentional. The insurance companies do these sorts of things to make the task onerous. The longer they can hold on to your money and not pay you, the more they can earn on that money. Eventually they say, well, maybe people will run out of their diligence and they won't be as patient, and we won't have to pay that claim. It takes incredible stick-to-itiveness and fortitude. You can't give up, because they'll never give up. They hire the greatest actuarials at all our great schools and put them to work to figure out how to keep our providers from their money. And we simply can't allow that. Okay, so sorry I went off the track, but when I start to hear these things, I get a little bit upset. Okay, so the third, we talked about coordination of benefits, why the insurance companies do that and make your patients call to say if they have a second insurance or not. We talked about the policy not in effect. Lisa touched on that, what to do. The third one that we see so many times, the language in the EOP, explanation of payment, says the service is not covered. And again, if you've done your verification of benefits at the beginning when you first took on this client, you would have asked the questions in the PowerPoint deck that you're going to be presented with. It's going to list all the questions you should ask during a verification. And if you do that job correctly, you will know that your service that you're going to provide, standard psychotherapy or diagnostic intake, whatever it is that you're going to be claiming, is a covered service and you are entitled to get paid for it. And yet, when that EOP comes back, there it is, service not covered. So what to do about that? There's a few reasons this happened and a few circumstances it happens under. And this is one that you absolutely can get paid for, and you should get paid every time for, as long as you have the call reference ID from the original verification of benefits call. So if you are seeing a patient for the first time and you submit your claim, some of you are using electronic software to do this, EHR software. Some people still do it on HCFA 1500, the red and white forms that you submit claims on. Some people still do it that way. Everybody's got their own way. But if you send in a claim, and we're using Horizon right now because they're the 800-pound gorilla for New Jersey providers, but this is true of all commercial insurers. You submit a claim for the first session, and it's no secret that the first session diagnostic intake is a 90791. That's a CPT code. And you fill in the diagnosis and you send that claim in. And you've done your verification. You know that this policy is in force. And now 14 to 21 days later, 30 days later, if you're checking, you open up the mail or you go on to the portal and you look at the EOP and zero payment, nothing allowed. And the language used is service not covered. I think we actually have a, Dan, do you have that form? I'm not looking at the screen, so there it is. So this is really opaque language. It means everything and it means nothing. So we need to get on the phone with the insurance company. I'm talking about for the first session, the 90791, right off the bat, they're not paying this claim. And you get on the phone, you get a claims rep, you hit number 4 for claims, and you talk to a first level claims person, and you say, I verified these benefits. Here's the call ID, reference number. I was told this service was paid, and now it says it's not being paid. Just that simple act will get this reversed. That simple. This is built into their computer systems. And remember that when Horizon gets a claim from a behavioral health provider or any medical provider, no human being ever looks at that claim. It goes right into their computer system. It gets matched up by the subscriber's member ID number to see if the benefits match. And if there's a mismatch, which happens all the time because Horizon's databases are terrible, they have zillions of pieces of information. So if they just get 1% typos wrong, they're going to get lots of these mismatches. And they come back and say it's not covered. So as soon as you call, you give them the call reference ID number. They will listen to that call while you're on the phone, typically with a supervisor, and come back and say, you're right, that was misprocessed. You'll get paid within 7 to 14 days. Don't take their word for it. Get a call reference ID for that call. Keep it with the patient record, and then check the EOP in 7 to 14 days and make sure that they did what they said. They reversed it. If they don't pay you within 60 days, this is an aside, but you should know, if they don't pay that claim within 60 days of the date of service, you're entitled to interest by law, 12% interest. So at the end of your EOP, you should see $1.44 added on for every day that they kept your money from you. I like when I get interest payments. It makes me feel like they're suffering, which of course they're not. Okay, that's if it's a 90791, the first session. This is another thing that happens all the time. You'll get paid for 3 or 4 sessions with that patient, and then you'll keep submitting claims the same exact way, and out of the blue, the 4th, 5th, 6th sessions, they'll stop paying it, saying that the service is not covered. Here, you got to be a little more careful. but as long as you've done your verification and you have the EOPs that they did pay you for without question, you get back on the phone, you get to the claims department, you give them the dates of service that you were paid for, tell them the claim that you're not being paid for, they'll put you on hold, they'll listen to the recording, and they'll come back and say, you're right, this service is covered. That's 90% of the time. Sometimes they'll come back and say, nope, there's a new provision on that policy that that service is no longer covered. That does happen. These are typically with employer provided plans. The employer has the right to say what is covered and what's not. Of course, they're paying for the policies in generally, and sometimes they'll do a determination that we're paying out too much for behavioral health, and they start cutting some services. So that you may find out after the fact. That's something you have to go back to the patient with. They'll go to their employer, their HR department. Typically, it can be worked out at that level. But from the day you find out that a service is no longer covered, now the onus is on you to work with your patient to figure out, okay, we're not going to get paid from insurance anymore for this. How do we want to proceed with you as a patient responsible for the cost of the session? So what I want to reiterate before we go on is that every time you call in the insurance company, Aetna, United, Blue Cross, any of them, make sure you get the name of the person you're talking to and the call reference ID. That is the leverage you're going to need to fight denials, and you will get denials. Nobody lives a life in behavioral health without seeing these things. Jennifer, that'll make sense?
Yeah, it does. Wouldn't that be nice if no one had to fight for the payments of the services that were already rendered? It'd make, I think, all clinicians' lives a little easier, right?
It would be.
We have a bunch of questions that have come in, but I'm going to just hold them, and I want to cover a couple of more things before we jump into a bit of the Q&A. So for those of you who have shot me private messages and questions, know that I've seen them, so hold tight. And if you have additional questions on what we've covered so far, we're going to answer them, but you can also put new ones in the chat box. So just an invitation to ask your questions there, because we're going to get to them in just a few minutes. But I want to talk a little bit about the financial impact, right? So we know that it's really important to get paid for the work that we've already provided. And what does that mean for us as providers? I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about the financial impact here. You know, what are the benefits of following through with these denials and recuperating this money that's sort of out there lingering? I know you have some great slides and statistics on some of that money, and I'm wondering if you can share that with the community. We're visual people as social workers sometimes, particularly with numbers.
Absolutely, I'm happy to. And this is something that, as people can probably tell, I don't have a warm spot in my heart for insurance companies. So this is something that really lays out the damage they're doing to the people who are out there doing important work and deserve to get paid. So at best practices in our company, we have kind of a typical client, and there is no such thing as typical client, but on average, our providers in private practice see about 25 insured patients a week. So we put this slide together to show about what the cost of not taking these actions is. So we found that for commercial insurers, and when I say commercial, I mean not Medicare. I'm talking about Aetna, United, Cigna, all of those. On average, they allow about $110 a session for behavioral health at the master's level. Different, of course, for nurse practitioners, psychologists, doctors. But at $110, if you see 25 sessions a week of insured people, your earnings should be about $2,750 from insurance companies. That's what they should be sending you. Next slide. That comes to $137,500 a year. So the average clinician here at Best Practices that's seeing 25 private insured patients will yield about $137,500 for the year. Okay, We know here at Best Practices from doing literally hundreds of thousands of claim filings that on average, we're going to get a 10% denial rate. That's the initial. They'll come back. 9 out of 10 will pay perfectly, no problem. About 10% of the claims will have a problem. That means over the course of the year, the insurance companies are withholding or delaying payment of $13,750 to one of our providers. We can't have that. Just by taking the actions we've described today, doing your verifications, recording the information, fighting where necessary, you can reduce that, or you should be able to reduce that to a 2% denial rate. Means now the insurance company is only holding $2,750. That means you got an extra $11,000 that they were trying to keep from you. We can't allow this to happen. We encourage everybody to take it for $11,000 on average. We think it's worth it for every provider to take the extra time and absolutely be diligent about getting what's theirs.
Yeah, absolutely. It certainly doesn't seem like that big of a number, but when you put it in a yearly format and you think about, that amount of money being reduced from your salary and what that can mean for a social worker's bottom line, that is an incredible amount. So thank you so much for sharing this. And again, we're going to send some of this information to you all in the slides following today's presentations, just so you can get a better understanding around some of those numbers. We do have a couple of questions. So I'm going to pop around a little bit in terms of topic, if that's okay with our friends over at Best Practices. Great questions have come in. Lori actually had one in the chat, and it goes back to some of the questions on the interest. Really important topic to talk about. Lori wanted to know how many days after not being paid can they charge the interest, the 12%? At what day number can you start charging that?
Sure, and it's not that you charge it; it's that their computer automatically calculates. So it's the 91st day after the date of service. Now they will try to say it's 91st day after the date of denial. It's not the case. It's after the date of service, and then they start to accrue it. And you can actually do the math and do 12% if they are 130 days late in paying you. It took them an extra 4 months to pay you. You'll do the calculation based on the 12% interest rate.
Great, thank you. I think that's such an interesting point to make. One, I'm not sure that everybody knew about the interest that needs to be accrued. So if you don't know, you can be an advocate for yourself, but also just knowing that nuance of, date of service versus date of denial is really an important one, just to make sure that you're keeping that checks and balances, on those insurance companies. Shelley had a great question as well, and this is one we hear about so often, so I'm interested to hear your perspective on it. Any advice about denials or reductions for telehealth? Some insurance companies are now requiring that clinicians use a particular platform, and it's usually this all-in-one service with them, and they will either deny a claim or make a client pay more if it's not used, their particular proprietary platform versus whatever the clinician is preferring.
Sure.
Thoughts on what you're seeing in this space?
Sure. So commonly, did you say Shelley? Shelley probably experienced somebody wants them to use Teladoc. Teladoc is within the industry a certain platform. And the key to this is they do not have the right to tell you what platform to use. When you do your verification of benefits, if they don't specifically say, your question is going to be, is telehealth services covered? And if it is covered, what benefits are covered? That gives them the opportunity to say, it's only covered if you use this platform. Typically, they don't say that because that's buried in the language that the person reading the screen has to say. They never get to that. If they don't specifically say you must use this or you're not going to get paid, get the reference ID. And when that claim, if it gets denied, you can go back and say, you never told me that. I told the client we were going to use Zoom or we were going to use Doxy. And that's what we did. And now they have to pay the claim, and they will.
That is a very important piece of information. I know many clinicians are running up against that right now. So again, going back to that initial phone call and having a recording of that verification really is incredibly important as clinicians move forward and navigate some of this space. I'm going to bounce around a little bit more to a different question. Another question that we've gotten in, I got a letter from BCBS. They want my record concerning past sessions. What do I do?
I can take that question. This is a good question. It's actually fairly complex. You do, once you're impaneled with an insurance company, you do need to comply when they request information about claims, your claims and your notes. However, it is such a complex question and answer because there are some HIPAA concerns and informed consent. And I don't mean to pass the buck on this, but we hope to actually address this question at greater length in a future webinar, a future community conversation. So I hope you can hang tight. But also, if you want to submit any additional questions, including this one later on to us, we may be able to address in greater detail. Dave, do you have anything else to add to that?
Just that I hate insurance companies, and when they ask for this stuff, they do it. Everything that insurance companies do when it comes to paying claims and the claims process, we need to remember is aimed at keeping us from our money as long as they can. The longer they keep the money, the more they earn on it. One thing I do want to touch on, Jennifer, that people may find interesting, it's a little bit unrelated, is every year Horizon and every other affiliate of the Blue Cross has to go before a board, a government board, and go over some statistics, and they have to say how much of their claims they paid out of premiums, and they use those statistics and they go before these boards and tell them that's how they get to raise premiums. Look how much we paid out. They use all of these tactics so that they can raise premiums on the subscribers. Ultimately, all right, I'm off the soapbox. On to the next thing.
That's all right. I think you're in good company here. It can be an incredibly frustrating experience. I'm going to shift gears a little bit to a question about EOPs. We did get a question in. I received an EOP showing a deductible being applied, even though I was told there was none during verification. What do I do? I wonder if Danielle, is that something that you could field?
Yes, we're right back to my alley of verifications. All roads lead to verifications. Yes, so unfortunately, this does happen. You call, you get the information, they tell you deductible's been met, and you tell the patient that, and you tell them, you'll have a $10 copay. They're pleased with that information. Then you get the EOP and it shows that they're putting that money towards the deductible, which means they have a deductible to meet, which is putting you in a really bad place because now this patient potentially is going to have to pay $109.81 for each session, right? So what we do is we call the insurance company back. We use the call reference ID number we would have had when we made that initial call and tell them, you told us this person had met their deductible and we insist that they cover those dates of service. And going forward, we will tell the patient that they do indeed have a deductible to meet. And in the future, that's what they will owe. But that's a really bad way to start, isn't it? A patient thinks they only have a $10 copay and it's, over 100. So yeah, but that's how we handle that. And we let the patient know everything that happened, and the past will be fine, but going forward, it will have to be the full amount.
That is a really difficult note to start out on for new clients, and just a yucky way to start the relationship. Staying with something that you spoke about a little bit earlier, I know we touched upon it briefly, but the idea of Medicaid, we didn't discuss, or I'm sorry, Medicare, we didn't discuss it. And I'm wondering if there's anything unique to Medicare that people should keep in mind as they're moving forward with billing and insurance. And I imagine there is.
Yeah. It is. It's much different than commercial insurance, and all of the topics we are discussing today are really specific to commercial insurance. So our teams talked about having a webinar about, Medicare specifically, because it is so different.
It is a unique world. Oh, David, I think you're talking, but on mute.
Thank you. I'm just going to forgive me for that. I just want to add to that is Medicare is the greatest insurance company we have. You very seldom get a denial from them. Their records are pristine. If they don't pay, there's a reason you didn't get paid. Would they pay properly, promptly, quickly? If you need help, you get help. You're talking to somebody knowledgeable. So Medicare presents other issues. I'm not going to say that they're, free of any issues, but what Danielle said is right. The issues we're talking about today are specific commercial. We will do a webinar based on the Medicare challenges, but they're myriad and kind of different than what we're talking about today.
Great, thank you. We're putting notes on our pad of paper right next to us of future community conversations that we should tackle together. Another question that came in from the chat room was any tips on getting your in-network rate raised? And is that something that you've seen from providers? Anybody have success doing so?
Okay, that's kind of a tricky question. And the answer is, we have never seen anybody apply for a raise in allowable rate for a set CPT code and get it. These are standard universal rates. Now, that's not to say that you may get an EOP from a commercial insurer with a different rate on it. There are plenty of times we've experienced where an EOP, you'll send in a claim and it'll get miscoded at the insurance level, and they won't pay you at the rate for a master's level provider. They'll pay you with a rate for an MD or a nurse practitioner, a much higher rate. Those things happen. If you go back and contest it, they'll realize they make that mistake and they'll take that money right back from you. They're great at that. They're quick to take it back. So we have never seen the case where somebody applied for an increased rate for a standard CPT code and received it.
Okay, that we don't want them to take away our money. That's for sure. I have another question that's come in, and not on today's conversation, but one that we get and we hear about quite frequently, and that is of insurance companies specifically now making payments through a special like card, et cetera, sort of refusing to pay direct deposit or write checks, et cetera. And as it's our understanding that that is against New Jersey state law, but wondering if you have any experience with that and navigating and making sure that providers get paid in the way that they prefer to here in New Jersey.
Sure, I'll help with that. This is over the last year, notices went out that we're not going to pay paper checks anymore. We'll stick to Horizon for the time being. Not even, all insurance companies. And you'll start getting faxes of EOPs with what's called a virtual credit card attached to it. And if you don't take credit card, if you don't want to pay the 3.2% credit card fee, then you have to call the number on the card and say, I don't want this. What are my options? And they'll tell you, oh, no problem. Here are your options. We can direct deposit into your account, but we're going to charge you 2% for that. Even for direct deposit, they want to get a piece. And these are companies like Echo Health and, oh, there's a million of them that are third-party processors of payments. They have to give you a free option. By New Jersey law, there must be a free option. And even though they say they won't send paper checks, they will send paper checks. United is a huge offender of this. They want to give you all credit cards because they make money on it. Everything they do is aimed at making money. These are for-profit ventures. So you have to get on the phone. You have to say, if the only way you're going to pay me without taking any fee out is checks, you have to start sending me checks. And they'll send you a form. You fill it out, fax it back, hope they get it and process it. And in a period of time, you'll start getting checks instead of these virtual credit cards.
Thank you so much. I know that that is a really big question that providers have faced in the last year, and incredibly frustrating to just have to battle that on top of also, following up with benefits and making sure you're getting paid for what you're owed. Now, even just getting the physical check can be really difficult. Lots of business operation stuff that people are facing versus spending time with clients and doing the things that we really love as social workers. We have time for just a couple of more questions, and I'm going to jump in. I see a bunch of them online, so I'm going to do the best I can to ask them. A question from Joel. Many times on patient's medical card, there's written for a specialty copay a certain amount, and in reality on an explanation of benefits is indicated a different amount. How do you proceed with that?
All right, Daniel may talk to this, but I'm gonna tell a couple things. The first thing is on the patient card, the front of the card where it gives you information, there could be 2 or 3 columns, tier 1, tier 2, inner circle, specialty copay, all these things. The first most important thing on any card is on the back of the card. If you take the time to read the language, it says anything shown on this card may or may not be true. This may be accurate, it may not be. Check with your insurance company to get the most accurate information. And they do that so they have plausible deniability. Whatever you see in a card, yeah, maybe we'll stick to it, maybe we won't. For behavioral health, unless it specifically says behavioral health on the front of the card for benefits, the line that you're interested in is SPC or specialty provider. And that'll either give you a dollar amount, which is a copay, or it'll give you a percentage, which is coinsurance. You need to know your allowable amount in the case of coinsurance, so you can tell the patient, oh, your policy covers 80% of the cost, 20% is your out of pocket. This allowable amount from this insurer is $100, so you owe $20. And depending on the allowable amount, that will fluctuate. Again, the information on the front of the card, the insurance company, just like when you go to their online portals, they will not be held to what's published there. The only way you can hold them to anything is by getting them on the phone and getting a call reference ID.
Great, thank you so much. I think we've got one takeaway is make the phone call, make the phone call, make the phone call, right? Get that number, be on recording as asking and having them commit to you so that you can follow up and hold them accountable to that commitment. I think we have time for one last question before we wrap up today's conversation. I know that there's a few, so I apologize that we're not going to be able to get to them all, but there will be some options of following up after today's conversation. The last one comes in. If an insurance company denies the claim, do then we have the ability to charge the client personally for that? So if their insurance company denies it, you can't recover that from the insurance company, then what's next? What do you do?
Sure. So the answer is yes. Unfortunately, if you get a new client, I'm hoping every provider, like all our providers, you give them your informed consent and your HIPAA privacy policies. Those are 2 documents you should be giving to every new patient and have them sign that they've received it. Once you have that, your informed consent should say that if the insurance company doesn't pay, understand that we're going to file this claim on your behalf and hopefully get paid. But if we don't, you're accepting, meaning the patient is accepting responsibility financially. So if you get a denial of claim and you determine that that denial is accurate, typically it's not. Most of the time, it's not a valid denial. You have to fight it. Once you've done your due diligence and you now have a reason, you can go back to your patient and say, this claim was denied because, oops, you didn't pay your premiums. And your period that you could reinstate the policy lapsed. So they're not covering any of your benefits. Unfortunately, now you have to go back to the patient and work something out to get paid from them. But yes, they have ultimate responsibility if you've done your paperwork correctly.
Yeah, that's always something that we certainly impress upon our private practitioners. And for those of you who are thinking about going into private practice and have some of those like nuanced, how do we start up? How do we make sure that we have all the forms in place so that you are doing those informed consents and you do have all of that proper documentation up front? We have a great program that we offer, a private practice boot camp that'll go into some of the nuances of getting all your ducks in a row, so to speak, on starting your practice. We are at the end of our hour. Time flies when you're having fun and when you're talking about the slippery slope of insurance. There were a lot of conversations and questions that we weren't able to get to today. And not to worry, we are going to follow up with our friends over at Best Practices and see about setting up additional community conversations to tackle some of those questions. But we are going to drop in the chat box a quick jot form. So Helen is just posting it right there. If you have questions or you want to follow up with the team from best practices about some particular instances related to your practice, et cetera, or if you just want more information about the services that they provide, you can fill that out and we'll be sure to get your contact information over to them. Again, we're going to be following up with a PowerPoint presentation that captures a lot of the things that we spoke about today. You'll be getting that automatically as a registrant for today's conversation. And we look really forward to engaging in more conversations with you. It's been so fun to hear about your story and hear about how your work came to be, and see your passion for helping social workers do the work and really putting them back in the role of being a social worker and not as a manager of phone calls to insurance companies.
Excellent.
So thank you
so
all
much.
very much.
Thank you for having us. We appreciate it.
Thank you all so much for joining us today. We look forward to future community conversations with you all. Have a good day, everyone.
Jen, if you cannot close the meeting right now, it'll give people a chance to do the job.
Could you get
if
me
that's
out?
okay.
We will keep the room open for a couple of minutes while we're doing that. Absolutely.